Hello and welcome back to our conversation on the open economy. As we talked about earlier, the concept of an open economy is the ability to trade internationally. Goods and services traded internationally between two or more countries. That is what we call an open economy. We look at what we call a trade balance, an exchange rate, when we talk about the open economy. It's important to also understand the capital flow, capital inflows and outflows. When we talk about capital, we're talking about cash, investing, stocks and bonds, human capital, property, plant, and equipment, etc. That's capital. The flow of the capital has an impact on the open economy. So, talk about the exchange of goods and services, but we also talk about the exchange of capital in foreign currency exchanges and also loanable funds. We also look at things like policies, look at things like government structures, etc. Those also have some impacts. The open economy can be defined as, through a formula, of course, defined as savings equals domestic investment plus net capital outflow. We look at things like the supply of loanable funds. That's the amount of cash available for lending based off of national savings. We look at the demand for those loanable funds. Domestic investment, which is represented as I, and net capital outflow, which is NCO. The net capital outflow is greater than zero. There are net purchases of capital overseas. It adds to demand. It increases demand when net capital outflow is greater than zero. When net capital outflow is less than zero, we have resources coming in from abroad. It reduces the demand for domestically generated loanable funds. So, easy way to think about this. When net capital outflow is greater than zero, we have higher demand for loanable funds. When the net capital outflow is less than zero, we have a less demand for for loanable funds. When we think about loanable funds, we're thinking about, like a bank loan. Very similar. It's domestically generated flow of resources available for capital accumulation. That's a fancy way of saying bank loan. And what do we do with bank loans? Well, we purchase assets with them, of course. We add to the demand for capital funds when we use bank loans to purchase assets. When an asset is located in the home country, we identify that as the letter I for investing. For assets located in other countries, foreign countries, we identify that as NCO, net capital outflows. Interest rates, of course, have an impact on loanable funds. The lower interest rate, of course, it will encourage people to get loanable funds. The more people save, let's say that your savings interest rate is high. It encourages you to save more money in the bank. That increases the amount of loanable funds available. Of course, the opposite is also true. And when the interest rates are higher, it also discourages investment. because they'll save instead of investing. It also discourages people from buying foreign assets. We're going to save instead of invest. It also encourages foreign investment in U.S. assets when interest rates are higher in the United States. Because they're going to use their home currency, not the United States currency. Loanable funds, I want you to think of your typical supply and demand curve. As you know, supply is upward sloping and to the right. Demand is downward sloping and to the right. The same concept applies with loanable funds. Supply and demand curve, same as it normally is, even for loanable funds. The point of equilibrium is going to be the interest rate. Supply and demand for loanable funds meet. That's going to be the interest rate. The amount that people want to save and the amount that they want to invest. Here's an example of that. Supply, upward sloping to the right. Demand, downward sloping to the right. The point of equilibrium is where the interest rate is. Foreign currency is bought and sold on open markets. Okay, so for example, let's say you're going to travel to Europe in the next few months. So one thing you should do is go to the mall, but not just for shopping. Okay, inside the mall you'll find what's called the foreign currency exchange market. You've probably seen this before at some point. A lot of large shopping malls have them. Airports have them. Some of the train stations have them. I'm pretty sure Union Station in DC has one of these. It's called a foreign currency exchange market. So you go there with your U.S. dollars and you say, "Hey, I need you to change these into euros because I'm going to do some traveling." Great, no problem. So what happens in that exchange is that you give them U.S. dollars, they give you back euros, right? That's how the market works. It works the same way for any time that we do trade with other countries, because we still have to do the exchange process when it comes to buying and selling those goods and services from other countries. So the net capital outflow equals your net exports. When this happens, we have net capital outflow equal to net exports. That helps to establish the exchange rate. If there is a trade surplus where net exports are greater than zero, exports are greater than imports, obviously. That's what a trade surplus is. But the net sale of goods and services brought obviously means we have higher goods and services being sold out to other countries. Americans will use the foreign currency to buy foreign assets, meaning we'll buy products and services made in other countries using their currency. When that happens, capital is flowing outside of the United States, which of course means that net capital outflow is going to be greater than zero. Just as we talked about in the last chapter, when net capital outflow is greater than zero, we know that there's a trade surplus. The opposite is true as well. When there's a trade deficit, net capital outflow will be less than zero. Uh, yeah, and some of that is going to be financed by American assets abroad. Foreign currency exchange, how do these places get that foreign currency? I've often wondered that. You're at the mall and you go to that foreign exchange, the foreign currency exchange place. It's like, well, how do they have all of these currencies from around the world there? A lot of that's established through net capital outflow. It's the quantity of dollars applied to foreign assets, right? In this case, you'll notice the supply curve is vertical. Just remember when we talked about the supply of money, the supply of physical cash. It said that the supply curve is vertical because it's controlled by the central bank, right? The same is true for foreign currency exchanges. The quantity of dollars applied uh, for the net capital outflow, it does not depend on the real exchange rate. It simply depends on the central banks. Demand for foreign currency is based on net exports, where the quantity of the dollars demanded, of course, is going to be net of goods and services. It's also based on real exchange rate. If the exchange rate is going to be high, I'm probably going to want less. If the exchange rate is lower, I'm going to want more. Okay? That's a conceptual framework. If the exchange rate is high, I want less of it. If the exchange rate is low, I want more of it. The exchange rate is set at the point of equilibrium, which is what we talked about earlier. This is the demand for dollars. It's based on the real exchange rate. As the exchange rate changes, that means the supply and the demand are changing as well. Supply, as we said, based off of the central banks, is straight vertical. Demand is downward sloping and to the right. The point of equilibrium is the exchange rate. Equilibrium helps to identify market for loanable funds. Savings equals investments plus net capital outflow. Equilibrium also helps to identify market for foreign currency exchanges, where net capital outflow equals net exports. The point of equilibrium is linked to market loanable funds through net capital outflow. So with this one, the real interest rate. Capital outflow is negative when it's less than zero, positive when it's above zero, and the interest rate is somewhere in between, usually. Market for loanable funds from equilibrium is based on the supply of the money, which is through national savings. The higher the national savings, the more money is available to be lent. When we talked about banking, I said, if we all went to the bank at the same time, do you think they'll have our money? And a lot of you said, well, no. Well, why not? Because they already lent it to someone else. Remember? And that's the concept behind the supply of money for loanable funds. The demand for loanable funds is going to be based on the domestic investment and the net capital outflow from equilibrium. The interest rate is the point of equilibrium, and it's defined by the letter R. Net capital outflow is downward sloping to the right, and the point of equilibrium is the point of R. Foreign currency exchanges, the supply is based on the net capital outflow. The demand is based on net exports, and the exchange rate is the point of equilibrium. Real exchange rate is based on the price of goods and services relative to the future value. Prices of domestic goods and services are typically relative to foreign goods and services, and is based on the point of equilibrium. The equilibrium and the exchange rates adjust simultaneously when there's changes in supply and demand. This is how we balance out supply and demand for loanable funds and foreign currency exchanges. Point of equilibrium and the real exchange rates adjust simultaneously to determine the amount of national savings, domestic investment, net capital outflows, and net exports. A couple of examples of how this looks. We see the interest rate, supply and demand, where R is the interest rate, real exchange rate. And we see E1 exchange rate for supply and demand. So remember, R interest rate and E exchange rate indicate the point of equilibrium for both loanable funds and for the supply of foreign currency. Things that impact concepts of loanable funds, things like government budget deficits. Oh man, the United States is so terrible with this. We constantly run a deficit every year, right? It's where the government spending exceeds the government revenue. We spend more than we take in. That's called the deficit. Okay? The government's notorious for doing this, especially here in the United States. We spend more than we take in. We have a negative public savings, right? No one's saving money, everyone's living paycheck to paycheck. Now we call it a negative public savings. It reduces national savings, it reduces the supply of loanable funds, increases the interest rates, and reduces net capital outflow. How do we fix this problem? Tell Congress to stop spending money on stupid things. Problem solved. Fortunately, our country is a little backward when it comes to spending money, so, you know, they have their own printing press. The problems with government budget deficits is that it crowds out domestic investment. It's hard to invest in our infrastructure if we don't have the money to do it, because we're busy spending money in other areas that we shouldn't be. And very simple. The deficits also decrease the supply of foreign currency exchanges. The value of the currency appreciates in value. Exports fall and pushes trade balance toward a deficit. Again, the solution to the government's deficit is to stop spending so much money. Why it's so hard in the United States for them to figure that out? Deficits have an impact on the amount of loanable funds. It reduces the supply, which increases the demand and it also increases the interest rates. Governments typically set trade policies. This is where tariffs and quotas come into play. Government policy dictates the amount of goods and services flowing into and out of the country. We have tariffs and quotas that get put on these products and services. A tariff is simply a tax on the import. So if I buy a vehicle from Japan that's made in Japan, I will pay a tariff on it. It's an extra tax because I'm importing it. There are also quotas put on the amount of vehicles coming in from Japan. So what I mean by that is I can only import so many vehicles into the United States each year. But they put a cap on it. It's called an import quota. So oftentimes what a lot of companies do is they have voluntary export restrictions in order to kind of make everyone happy when it comes to the policymakers. With respect to import quotas, it decreases the level of imports, increases net exports, increases the demand for dollars in the market of foreign exchange, and of course the exchange rate goes up, which discourages exports. So import quotas are really bad policy, but a lot of countries have it. Import quotas also do not have an impact on the exchange rates. They do not have an impact on net capital outflows. They do not have an impact on net exports. But there are decreases in imports and decreases in exports. So import quotas are typically bad policy, but they do not have impacts on exchange rates, capital outflow, or net exports. So what about loanable funds? So the import quotas, yeah, I mean it'll actually increase the demand for loanable funds to some degree, but it's really just a change in the exchange rate. Exchange rate goes up when we have import quotas. Everything else typically remains the same. Trade policies do not affect the United States trade balance, typically. Net exports equals net capital outflow, which equals savings minus investment. Policies affect companies, industries, and other countries. They should just say it affects everyone because everyone is either working somewhere, wants to buy something, or wants to do some kind of trade. Political instability obviously will also cause problems when it comes to trade and investment. I'm going to pull my money out of a country when there's political instability. Very simple. Because you never know what's going to happen to that money or those interest rates. We've seen this happen. Large and sudden reduction of demand for assets located in a particular country. We saw this in Venezuela with Chavez. That whole situation, right? A lot of companies in the United States pulled out of Venezuela. We saw that in Cuba. A lot of U.S. companies pulled out of Cuba just before, as Castro was coming to power. We see that today in China. A lot of U.S. companies are pulling out of China. We see it in Russia. A lot of U.S. companies pulling out of Russia. because of political instability. It happened in Mexico in 1994. It's gotten a lot better now. It's a lot more stabilized in Mexico when it comes to investing. But in the past, yeah, sure, there were some political situations in Mexico in the early 90s, which caused some investors to pull their investments back. What happened during that time is that the interest rate in Mexico increased. It reduced the domestic investment, slowed capital accumulations, and it slowed economic growth. What happened to the peso? The peso devalued at the time. It was really, really cheap. It's still pretty inexpensive, but it's a lot more stable than it used to be. Exports became cheaper and imports became more expensive for Mexico. So Mexico had more of a trade surplus at the time. These are the impacts of what happened with the loanable funds, net capital outflow, and the exchange rates in Mexico at that time. When in 1994 in Mexico, when that situation happened, there was a flight of cash, right, that came out of Mexico. It impacted both the United States and Mexico when that happened. There was a fall in net capital outflows to the United States. The dollar appreciated in value. The interest rates came down. But those changes were much smaller in the United States than compared to what happened in Mexico during that time. Any comments, questions, concerns at all about the open economy?
No.
Pretty straightforward. Okay.
No questions on my end.
Awesome. Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate it. Okay. So yeah, the open economy, it's pretty straightforward, really. The concept is simply open exchange of goods and services for a currency across borders. Very, very straightforward. And as long as you understand the very basics of supply and demand, you'll be able to understand the concepts of the open economy. So, just kind of recap where we are in the course. We're in week 12. I'm sorry, we're in week 13. Oh my goodness, the time is going by so fast. So we're in module 4, week 13. We have chapter 18 quiz and 19 homework, both related to the open economy. They're both due on Sunday night as normal. And if you need any help, just let me know. Be happy to help you. With that, anything else? Now's your time. Any other comments, questions, concerns?
Not at this time.
No, Professor, I don't have any.
Thank you, Chiquita. Appreciate you. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. Okay, so again, if you need me, you have any questions, you know how to get me. You can email me, call me, set up office hours, whatever you need, I'll be here for you. I sincerely appreciate all of your efforts in the course so far. You're all doing fantastic. We only have a few weeks left, so let's finish this thing strong, okay? I really want to see you all do well. If for whatever reason you fell a little bit behind, like, last week, maybe you're having too much fun, that's okay. But, just make sure that if you're missing anything, I need you to get that submitted. And I'm looking forward to the next few weeks. Let's make this a good rest of the semester. And I promise I'll be here to help you no matter what. So thank you all so much for your time today. I appreciate all of you. I hope you have a wonderful night. And please remember to stay safe, wash your hands, do the right things. I'll see you all again next Monday. Thank you so much.
See you, sir.
Dr. B.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
B.
Thank you.
Nice evening, bro.
You too.